Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head and I'm Oles Gerjuk. Today we're discussing an interesting fact. Russians do not want to live in Russia. Mainly we're now talking about young citizens. During the past 5 years, the amount of people willing to live abroad has increased by more than 2 times. This is according to widely respected Levada Center, a Russian independent, non-governmental research organization. To discuss the trends of migration and the reasons that force Russians to flee their country, we welcome to our studio Grigory Frolov, director of the Free Russia House. Hello and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Hi.
So, from what I know, you're a Russian national and you represent the organization that informs the United States, as it is based there, and the rest of the world on the real situation in Russia, and also it's developing some strategic views about Russia without Putin or after Putin or without Putinism, if I may say so. This is written on the website of your organization. So I may say that you represent the civil society that opposes Mr. Putin and his regime. Is this correct?
Yes, indeed.
So if we're speaking about this survey, its responders are aged between 18 and 24 years old. And basically we're talking about students or those who have just graduated from the universities and have just started building their career. And from the results, we see that 53% of these responders, which is a little more than a half, cannot see or hardly see their future in Russia, which means that basically every second a Russian young citizen cannot see his or her future in Russia. Could you please tell us why is that? What can be connected with?
Yeah, look, so first of all, now we're talking about the group of the highest social mobility in Russia. That's like the youngest, the most integrated in the world, the people less affected by the Russian political propaganda, and the people who actually knows or more or less understands that there is like a rules of internet and possibilities to actually travel around the world and find jobs somewhere outside the city or village or town, right? Which is an older generations don't know that much. Secondary, if you're going to look in a data set from Levada Center in a perspective of like 10 years or a bit longer, we're going to see a certain moving in the numbers. The last time that was almost as much high people wanted to leave Russia as right now, like about 84%, was in 2011, right after Vladimir Putin decided to come back as a president of Russia and have this rokirovka with Dmitry Medvedev. That was like a toppest moment before. So now what we see is that ever since the annexation of Crimea and beginning of war in Ukraine, we saw that the number of people who wanted to leave Russia was growing, and actually also that's we got a confirmation of numbers from like European migration agencies and the United States data centers that a lot of people actually live in Russia and seeking for the place somewhere outside. And so coming back to this year, there is an interesting thing that it was 2 polls of Levada Center just this year. One was like 6 months ago, and the one which they just published a couple of days ago. And so the difference is about 20%. And I think that
20% in which favor?
Higher. Now it's 20% higher than like just 6 months ago.
So now it's not 53%, but 73%?
No, now it's 53, and it was 20% less 6 months ago.
6 months ago?
Yeah, which...
So this aggravation develops drastically.
Yeah, because the whole summer of 2019, we had quite a large protest rallies all around Moscow, and there was a couple of big political campaigns in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and there was like a well-known situation all around Russia with the certain high amount of people backing the protesters around Russia. And so since this movement is now going down, and we are like moving to another wave of political repression against the protesters, we now see that the people who would, just 6 months ago more likely to say that they want to protest rather leave, now saying that they want to leave again.
Let's just explain the international audience that nowadays Russians do hate this drama around Moscow municipal elections when the candidates from the opposition were forbidden from registration their candidacy, city, and this provoked massive outrage and then protests around the city, which led to many arrests, beating from the police, etc., etc. So this was the turning point that you think that added these extra 20% to the amount of people that are now cannot see their future in their country.
I think it definitely impacts. Obviously, person usually need a little bit more time to kind of consider immigration than just 6 months.
Of course, yeah.
But
they started thinking about this.
Yeah, but that's the thing. If you're going to look to another research from Levada, it's also going to show us that the general level of people who would like to protest or who aren't satisfied with the current Russian government are actually growing. It's not like 60% yet, but that's a substantial number. And so we now see these two different poles, the level of unsatisfaction with government and willingness to protest, and the level of willingness to immigrate Russia. Mm-hmm. And these two things really correlate. And so when we have like another splash of public activity, there is obviously more people who'd like to support it, and so then the thinking of migration, kind of moves for a couple of months ahead, and then once we're having like a down in social activities and a new wave of repressions, and these new cases about the Moscow case with these young people who are now like going to be jailed soon, and some people already in jail because of protests in Moscow. That's all general think about which gives to wider audience, especially of youngsters who mm-hmm. gains their news feed from the internet, very stable mm-hmm. understanding that there is no much to do in a country, because you either go work for the governmental agency, or you kind of got nothing to do in your life. So migration is a possibility.
So this inflames the dissatisfaction with the policy of the country. But still, these surveys, they mainly concern the young generation of Russians aged between 18 and 24 years old. What if we speak about middle-aged Russians, 25 to 39 years old? Maybe you could tell us about this generation.
So if you're going to come back to the survey of Levada, it was actually it was covering more different age groups. So they was also covering this group, and I think the number is about 30%, which is also pretty substantial. That's like there is like a little bit different mindset between the generations. So if you look at the younger people, that's just people who look for possibilities for like first big job possibilities or an education. They're more mobile in terms of decisions. If we're looking for the older people, we are talking about either like mid-level professionals. We're talking about people with families. So when they consider migration, they also kind of having a more long-term view on the situation in Russia. So in their cases, they understand that either there is no professional growth, or there is no possibility to raise the child in good conditions, like with a decent school education, with decent Medicare. So that's like a little bit different idea, which moves this age group of people to migrate. And we see that there is a lot of people older than youngsters are moving outside the country. Like there is, for instance, the beginning of this year, the Atlantic Council published the research which was helping them to conduct on the political immigration from Russia, and it says that the conservative number of political immigration from Russia is about 2 million people for now, and that's conservative estimate. That's not some kind of just a random number. And they was researching this group of people and like actually doing serving them, and we now can see that a lot of these people are actually politically educated. Mm-hmm. They usually meet representatives of the mid-class. So it's not like a poor people. It's people who actually understand what happens, who had some good salaries in Russia. They just lose the possibility to develop themselves.
And they cannot see the further perspectives.
Yeah.
Well, if you outlined this political aspect of the segregation and maybe growing trend for moving out of Russia. If we discuss an economic aspect and economic instability as one of the reasons to move out from the country, I would like to remember the report of the Russian Federal Statistics Service on the social economic situation in Russia in the first half of this year, first half of 2019, and it says that expenses grow faster than incomes and the inflation eats up pensions. So what do Russian people say about this, and what does the Russian government respond to this?
Well, nobody cares what the Russian government says, because they always say that, that everything grows and everything is fine. In fact,
so people do not trust the government.
Yeah, definitely not in terms of numbers. I'm sure about that. What we know is that for last 6 years since the annexation of Crimea and introduction of the sanctions, it was no growth in ability of people to buy stuff. It was no growth in the quality of life, and like the whole idea of developing your career and possibilities of bigger salaries for a lot of people in Russia was freezed for 5 years already. Because if you work in Russia now, I mean, except for certain companies like the big internet giants or maybe big Russian state companies, you probably would never get as much money as you would like to, or as much money as you expected before the 2014. For this moment. So for 5 years, the careers of millions of people just freezed, independently from their political views. If you're not talking about any crony of Vladimir Putin,
right,
but for normal people. Mm-hmm. So, and then you kind of look at your life and you think, so I can stay in Moscow and have $2,000 a month this year and next year and in the 5 years, and then probably less. Or you can go somewhere else, and then with your education and with your experience, you can actually become richer and have a better life, more successful. So mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you do that? Just, if you're talking about completely unpolitical people, and then if you're talking about people who actually cares about political situation, they also see that, they got no political voice, they got no ability to actually express their disappointments of things happening around, right? And then they also understand that their kid's going to go to the school where it's going to be patriotic education.
So people feel in the deadlock, but how do Russians try to maintain the standards of living that they're used to?
Well, that's hard.
Yes, in this situation, because I remember the head of the central bank, Elvira Nabiulina. She was commenting that Russians do prefer now to take some bank loans in order to keep up with their lives, because they don't want to lose the quality of life that they're used to. What can you tell us from the daily basis, of your friends, people that you know and you communicate to in Russia? How do people keep up with this?
Yeah, well, look, we should also understand that Russia is still not a poor country. So it's not like Russia get incredibly poor after sanctions. So especially if we're talking about people who live in the big cities, that's still a certain decent way of life.
Well, money is circulating, obviously, but nobody wants to lose his or her standard of life.
I mean, but then we also have quite a huge proportion of people who live outside the big cities and who live completely poorly. But then if we're talking about the people who used to live in a good way, right? That's obviously a way to kind of be creative about your way of life. When the restaurants are getting more expensive and good food is getting more expensive, and then obviously loans are getting more expensive, what's the actual big problem? For instance, the level of bankruptcies within the small businesses and individual entrepreneurs is it triples every year. That's just crazy level of bankruptcies. So that's an unfortunate thing we can mention about the current state of the Russian population.
Well, your NGO is developing strategy, as I said in the beginning of our conversation, for Russia after Putin or a Russia without Putinism. Can you tell us, how do you see Russia after Putin, or can Russia exist without Putin?
Russia definitely can exist without Putin. We actually going to present just in a couple of weeks here in Kiev. We're going to present our forecast Russia 2030 with the scenarios of different aspects of the Russia in the region, including the scenarios of what's going to happen if Putin suddenly disappear.
So what's going to happen?
And
can you give us a little preview?
I would actually suggest your viewers to go to our website and read the report. It's really
just
good.
A hint, so they would be interested.
Well, we actually got a couple of scenarios, which includes the one with other cronies are starting to fight for the power, or with a more democratic soft transition of power, which also happens. It's now very interesting to see what's going to happen in Kazakhstan, for instance, because Kazakhstan is now going for the transit of power, which happens, of course, not inclusively for the society, but still that's like the first peaceful transit of power from the autocrat to another autocrat in post-Soviet area, and I think that Kremlin actually looks for this right now a lot and considers this as a way. So we'll see.
Yeah, but shift powers in Russia for sure is more interesting for Ukraine, as Russia is still aggressor state for Ukraine. So you say that the presentation is going to happen soon, and maybe a short thesis to give us a little hint. How do you see a future without Putin?
Well, I actually don't see that. I would say that everything would be way easier than we all expect at some point, when the people and the people from opposition and independent experts will be allowed to actually move Russia forward. Right now, a lot of the whole narrative about Russia and in its current state, about its conservativeness and about its aggressiveness and about like all this Asian stuff, actually, most of this is just artificial constructs which was created to sell this image of Russia, which is comfortable for the aggressive politics of Vladimir Putin. Once Russia would be, would get rid of this and, gonna concentrate on internal problems, not on the problems of the, Africa, or on like aggressive politics in east of Ukraine or in Middle East, then, it's going to be a lot of time to actually change stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. This, I think, will be a good conclusion to our conversation. I thank you for being a guest today in the studio, and thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
That was Grigory Frolov, director of the Free Russia House. Thank you for watching Head to Head, and stay tuned for more with UATV.